Hey guys, we're here with Pedro with the Baltic Supra. He's brought his engine up that I built a while back, and we're going to take the engine apart, see how it's living, see what problems it may be incurring, and build it for the next chapter. Pedro's got some new goals in mind.
Guys, this motor, I can't wait to tear into it today. This motor's done magic for me. It exceeded my expectations. I picked it up almost 2 years ago, a year and a half or so ago. At the time I was going like an 860 and I wanted to go bottom eights. That came sooner than I expected. Before long I was going sevens. We recently went to 770. I've won a bunch of races and had a bunch of fun. This back half of the year I was telling Jay, there's some big races I want to go to. So as always in drag racing we want to go faster, so I figured let's bring it, let's review it, and there's some ideas we want to talk about to hopefully push it to the next level.
Yeah. What you're witnessing is the slippery slope of drag racing. I just want to go low eights.
Yeah.
And here we are, and now it's time to go faster. So we're going to pop the engine out of the truck, we're going to take it apart and see what's going on in it.
Wait, excited.
You're not shy of Loctite this season. Yes, we got good sale on Loctite this week. So it's cool, man. You like Loctite.
So remember me texting you what, 6-7 months ago? I think after like a year running the car hard, I messaged Jay one day and I'm like, Jay, I haven't done nothing but just change the oil frequently and put good fuel in the car. Said, do you want me to do retort the head, do anything? Do I test on this? He's like, he said, keep doing exactly what you're doing.
Well, oil gets overlooked, but like the oil, especially when you're running alcohol, the oil gets contaminated and it becomes less oil. So if you keep fresh oil in the engine, it's gonna stay. It has its best shot of keeping the lubrication. Because these engines don't have a lot of oil in them. You know, like if you look around and try to find 1,000 horsepower engine that came from the factory only holding 5.5 quarts of oil, you're not going to find one. Oil is coolant as well as a lubricant. So that's why all the expensive cars come with dry sumps and a lot of oil capacity, because that oil, if you think about oil like you would think about soldiers in a war, you can only stay on the battlefield for so long before you have to take a break. Well, the oil, when you don't have a lot of oil in the engine, it's just constantly getting beat up and beat up and beat up and beat up, and it doesn't live forever, you know? So you have a dry sump, and then you have the opportunity for the oil to do its job, and then go in the tank and catch its breath, and then go back out and do its job, and then go back in the tank and catch its breath. That's the best case scenario for oil. That's why Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, all those engines that are expensive engines to warranty, they come with factory dry sump, because the dry sump system is cheaper than replacing the engine. So the snout of the crank, there's not very much vibration on the snout of the crank, and there's not very much vibration on the back of the crank either. Those are good signs. When you're detonating the engine, those parts are shaking. So what you'll do is, you see this little bit of printing, it looks like nail marks.
Very slightly.
Very slightly, and this still freely moves off and on. If you really rattle this engine, that metal, the balancer and the hub of the balancer and the crank start to mate, and then they get raised edges and peaks and valleys, and it gets very rough. Same on the flywheel surface. Like your flywheel surface is completely smooth. That's just not, you have not been shaking the engine. Which goes into good tuning, and it goes into having a lower compression engine that has more forgiveness. So feel this. Feel that nastiness?
Yep.
So, in my opinion, you're better off with a chilled gas can. Because this steel on steel, the top of the engine, oil is pressurized from the driver's side main galley up and through the head gasket and down the camshafts, okay? So the camshafts leak oil out from the journal and it leaks into the bucket. And if you look on the other side of the bucket, there's like a reservoir. See this little pocket?
Yeah, that's fine.
When the bucket goes down, oil splashes in, but it's just splash lubricated. But when you get into this wear on these cams, they need to be priority fed. You know, you could get exotic with a spray bar in the valve cover, try to get oil on there. But this material that you feel, this steel that's wiped up the bucket, so what happens now is if you feel that cutter, that's now a steel cutter. And that steel cutter is going to grind that bucket.
Yeah.
And remember when Javi had that bucket brake on his car? A couple years ago, well, probably 4 or 5 years ago, Javier had a bucket brake on the car. And it's because once you take this cutter and you start grinding that bucket, you're just gonna, it's just a matter of time. Now the lobes that aren't damaged are fine. And you could say, well then how come some lobes are damaged and some lobes aren't? Well, this cam is first fed and then this one is second fed. So even there, you know, you got the oil that comes up and it goes across the head, then it goes up the cam. Typically these are the ones that wear the most. But this is not good because what happens when you break a bucket, once the bucket's broken, the chances of the retainer and locks coming out are high. Valve goes into the engine, you've got a sizable problem. I use these cams on my car for a long time, but I use them with a coated bucket. It's expensive to get the buckets coated, but you don't have that risk because the coating is there for you when the oil isn't. It just gives you just a moment of insurance that you need. How tight are these? Those are
not supposed to be that tight.
Not supposed to be that tight. Material off. See this?
Yep.
Yeah. It's pretty uniform. That cutter action you don't want to deal with because it'll ruin the bucket. So feel the bucket with your fingernail. It's right here. The one that had the cutter on the lobe. Yeah. Once you enter that relationship. Yeah, once you've entered that relationship, it just downhill. Yeah. So there's a little bit of combustion on number 3. See this transfer? Where this tan transfers across the fire ring or the seal of the gasket. Okay. So if you had a coolant pressure gauge, you probably would be seeing some coolant pressure happening. Because what happens under large amounts of boost is these parts are moving. Right. If you look See this? See the mark right here? And then see the mark right here? Right. See this vibration?
Right.
Like, it's happening, man. Things are, you know, the stress that a small engine is under to make 13, 14, 1500 horsepower, 2000 horsepower, it's a tremendous amount of stress. And you're not, no matter who you are as an engine builder or a tuner or whatever label you give yourself, the stress is the stress. Right. It's like a set of dumbbells. It's just a set of dumbbells. They don't care who you think you are. It's just the dumbbells. This thing is the same thing. Like you're only going to be able to make so much power before you start to face the stress. But this, it doesn't scare me. There's not a lot of deformation. Like if it starts to push that ring and push the gasket out.
Yeah, I was looking at the head gasket. Is there any more?
You may get some on the deck side.
And that's a factory Toyota gasket.
Yeah. Nice
low
piece.
compression pistons.
One of the things that I would be steadfast in is one of the reasons why this engine lives so well is the guy tuning it is experienced and he understands what he's doing. He understands that the customer says, give me all of it, I'll be responsible. He knows the customer's lying to him and himself. This guy says, I know how the engine will live and I'll make a decision that's financially responsible and protects my reputation, because nobody wants to be the guy that's blowing stuff up. Mm-hmm. The younger guys, the newbies, they don't get that. So they can tear a lot of stuff up in the learning process. But you gotta be careful because you don't want to get to the point where your customers stop playing. Right. But this being an experienced tuner and a lower compression engine makes a huge difference in the longevity of the engine. See these marks here? See this X in the board? Can you pick that up?
Yep.
So it's on this one too. So this block is a Siamese bore block, meaning the cast iron is together, and then Toyota machines a hole down through it on both sides, and it's a water channel to run some water past the cylinder to cool it. And when you get to flexing those cylinders, those prints show up. So it's not on every cylinder.
Right.
But you know, if you get an engine that's really been run hard, you'll see those prints. And it's just a telltale, you know, because the metal is moving. You can't run from that part. I would say that for what you've done with this engine, that little bit of head gasket leaking is nothing, man. You can't get mad at it. You can't act like it's, you know, like there's some disastrous problem going on. That's really, really small potatoes for the amount of work this engine does. Born on date. How cool is it that you get to use a factory crank? You know, it's awesome. Pretty. I don't know of very many engines that you can get away with this amount of factory components. You know, we can like poke at it for the crankcase pressure problem, or poke at it for, you know, it made some coolant pressure or this or that. It's like it's very easy to lose track of. This is a car that can go a 7 1/4 mile and be driven on the street with full confidence. Right. And it's done with a large amount of factory components, and that's a big deal. You know, if you try to make sense to the guys that are a generation over the knee, and you start talking to them about what these little engines are capable of, they are convinced you're full of shit. They don't believe anything.
That sounds like a good conversation for Drag Week.
Oh man, they just, well, that I think the year before last at Drag Week, I went up to Tom Bailey, and I was like, what an incredible machine. I mean, that guy his car is nutty. Yeah. It's just nutty. You look at it, and it's just this amazing piece of hardware. And he wants to talk to me about these engines.
No way.
And he's just like, man, you have all, these stock parts and stuff. It's like, yeah, but you've got this, essentially a pro mod. He's like, yeah, but you got this little 6-cylinder. And so there's equal amounts of amazement and respect between the two platforms.
Freaking bearings are amazing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that is the aluminum rod. If you had a steel rod in this thing, it would look like crap.
Yeah.
Now you can see, like, here's the front of the engine,
Right.
first to get oil.
Last.
Here's the back of the engine,
Yeah.
last to get oil.
Wow.
So you see that white?
Yep.
But the white, it's not so far back. Yeah, the aluminum rod is a huge shock absorber. So that noise, the noise from the combustion, it's put into the piston, but then the rod is like a muffler.
Yep.
And that noise doesn't go down into the bearings. There's some power loss. Like, I think the Pro Stock guys claim 10 horsepower
I'm
less.
doing what?
Aluminum rod.
Really?
Because the torque transfer is less.
Wow.
It's a damper of sorts. But on an engine like this, you can't do it without it.
Right.
Because if you were logging oil pressure, you would see the chaos that's happening. And when you have the aluminum rod, it's like covering for your error, your ignorance. It lets you get away with a lot more because it has less mass and it has the ability to dampen. Now, these rods won't be reused.
No.
Yeah, they're service. What happens is they pound the pin bushing out of them over time.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is, if you had an engine with a steel rod and a factory oil pump at this level,
Yeah.
you would have put a set of rod bearings through it long ago.
Yeah.
The oil supply is crap.
No oil pressure sensor, no transmission temperature gauge, no coolant pressure, no EGTs, no safeties whatsoever on my standalone.
It's called the Hialeah nitrous controller, guys.
I'm from West Palm. Hialeah. But, no, yeah.
And this thing looks good. You got a little bit of vibration on these two caps, which is pretty normal for this power level. Like, you're not going to get away from that. You can see they walk on each other. Yeah.
That's very minimal.
Oh yeah. No, it's
For what I put this through, I was expecting a lot more wear and tear.
it's having the right people, man.
Yeah.
You have to understand that there are guys that they never get to this point because they don't have the right team of people around, and they have to look back on the memory of their builds being I could have done this, I should have done that. If I just could have done it one more time, it would have come out differently. You're not experiencing any of that stuff because you have an experienced engine builder, an experienced tuner, and an experienced transmission guy. I mean, Jason has been at this, forever. Jason was working on a Super Street Outlaw car when I was, in my mid-20s. I mean, the dude knows stuff. You have Lance that's been doing it forever. Like, I've been at it for a long time. Like, that's the difference. That's the hardest part of getting people to understand the strength of the team has everything to do with the outcome. You could have all the supplies to build a house, but if you
I
have
agree
bad
100%.
carpenters, you
I
don't
agree
know.
100%. Which is part of the reason why I'm so open about my builds.
Yeah.
I make videos talking about the items that I use, or I keep no secrets with any parts of my car. It's not just the parts that are making all this happen. It's the team that I have involved, and everything together has came a long way.
Right.
Without, you take out one of the pieces and I'm in bad shape. Just these hard parts don't tell the story.
It's the and a lot of people don't learn that. Like there's a group of guys that have broken stock blocks
Right.
and cracked cylinders and stuff, and you try to explain to them that if they soften their approach and they deal with the right people, the parts go away, and they just look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, it's the finesse, the whole system. You know, it's not just buy this, get that.
Right.
You have to
I
have
agree
talent
100%.
around the team.
I agree.
It's rough because, like, you know, you got guys like they have their one shot a year to go to an event and have a good time, and you watch it
And we've talked about
come
this.
apart.
I know.
And it's like I don't want to see them have a bad time.
Right.
I want to see them have a good time. But you have to be so gentle in the approach of what they're doing wrong, because they'll take it personal very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a good group of guys. You know, if you look at your car as a character, you know, you have you, which is you have a tremendous amount of heart, you believe in the magic, and you have enough income that you can afford to play. And then you have the rest of the players. You have me, you have Lance, and you have Jason. I mean, that's a pretty solid team for sure. You know, not to mention, you know, you're working on this stuff yourself, you know, or your group of guys that you have that'll come over and rent you.
I wasn't recording on my camera. I missed one earlier when we first took the crank apart.
Yeah.
And the pulley in the front was just sliding off the timing gear.
Yeah.
That it is. It's sliding off. You get a comment on that as well.
Yeah.
And now this seems like a similar topic.
Yeah, similar topic, because it's just vibration. So like you can push the pin out
Right.
with your finger.
Right.
Like that's a big deal, because you don't, when the pin gets chattered around, what it does is it raises the edge, basically where the pin ends.
Mm-hmm.
It beats the edge up, and then you have to pound the pins out. Well, not pound. If you have to pound the pin out, it's probably bent.
Okay.
But you can't just push the pin out with your finger. But looking at the pin boss,
Yeah.
these are trend pins. These are through hardened pins. They're expensive, but they're well worth their weight here. So see if the rest of them are like that. Generally, the cylinders that are more prone to detonate, the pins get stuck in. But again, you know.
Even the quality of oil. I know you noticed a little bit of like ethanol in the oil earlier.
Yeah.
But oil seems in great shape. Everything's sliding
Yeah.
at place. Nothing seems too
No, there's
worn.
nothing. See, this one's a little sticky.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, though. So you kind of have to. You take that into account when you think about how the engine is tuned and how it's living, because every engine has some amount of detonation. So if you look at if you take these all apart and you look at the upper rod bearings that have the most amount of wear, consequently they'll be the ones that were hardest to push the pins out of.
Right.
It's all just it's the language that the parts are able to talk in. It's just they're just like the witness. So in closing, we have an engine that has a small amount of damage to the valve train because the camshaft lobe has started to attack the bucket. The main bearings, they look okay. They do not look great, but this again is a
factory oil pump, and he's got aluminum rods, and he doesn't have an oil pressure gauge or an oil temperature gauge, so he doesn't really know when the oil's effectively too hot to be racing the engine, because the factory oil pump just can't keep up. The rod bearings look good. The pin bores look good. There's a small amount of vibration on a couple of the main caps. There is a little bit of a combustion leak on the head gasket. But overall, when you look at it as a system, for the amount of work the engine's been doing, it's in good shape. You know, you could, if you were really, really on a tight budget, you could put bearings and rods in this engine and put it back together and continue to run it. Because I would deck the block also, but you don't have a situation where you have any parts that are on the brink of failure. So the right time to take the engine apart, you're mid-season, you've got some big events you want to go to at the end of the year, and you can go into those events feeling prepared now.
I agree.